Hi, my name is Leyla Bile. I'm a London-based filmmaker, and this is my first time being in Frankfurt, and thank you for having me here. It's about the Somali sailors that came and throughout the colonial period in Cardiff, and how their life, unfolded there. What kind of hardships did they feel? What kind of triumphs, and how it was back then to now. Um, that's what and the reason why I called it the Safe Harbour is because it's their place of safety. It's their home. It's their livelihood. It's their work and their life is there. What motivated me to make films was probably I think as a child I always knew that I wanted to do something with filmmaking. I loved films from the age of 9, ever since I saw Star Wars for the first time. And when I saw a close-up shot of the Death Star, and I knew that this is what I want to do. This is what. But I think because being black, being a woman, and also when I was young, there weren't any Somali filmmakers. There was nothing that I didn't have someone that as a representative to show me that was a possibility. So I did other studies in the beginning, and I studied after high school. I did a bit of so many things. I started first doing hotel management for a year and a half. Didn't like it. Didn't like the university. I didn't like the people. I was really uncomfortable there and very unhappy. So I dropped out. So I left Holland and I moved to London and tried my luck there. And even when I moved to London, I didn't know, whether I should actually. I was still a bit uncertain. In Holland, I already did a bit of film studies, but I didn't like the theoretical part of filming and film studies. So I thought to myself, that's it. If I move to London, I'm definitely going to do filmmaking. But it took me a while to, take the plunge. And I think by the age of 30, I was like, okay, now or never. And that's why I decided to do filmmaking and BA film at Middlesex University. And and that was the only place ever within the educational system that I felt really at home. And Middlesex, the reason why I loved it, it was because it was really multicultural, and you had like practically anywhere, and you had different students from around the world, and I felt really comfortable, and I also loved the fact that the people that were teaching us were people that work within the industry, or they had so many years of experience of film studies or filmmaking. And when I finished out, and I was a bit sad to leave because that was the only place ever that I felt really comfortable studying, and I still miss it actually. As being a black female filmmaker, it is quite challenging because in general, throughout the history of filmmaking, has always been male-dominated industry, and it still is. And but on top of that, being black, and it's another add-on challenge. And the UK itself is one of the biggest filmmaking industries within one of the biggest, but it's still quite small, quite niche, quite you know you have to know people, you have to have connections, and 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 since the industry is so small in the aspect of networking, and I think being black does it gives you that extra challenge. But I think the other ways to work around it is to actually start your own and group your own. I want to say group. I mean, you have to make you have to be independent. And I think through maybe through social media, through YouTube, you can start off showing your own productions, and then hope that you will get noticed. Why did I decide to do a documentary about Somali sailors in Cardiff? Something so, unknown, even within the Somali community itself, within the Somali diaspora, is still very unknown, especially amongst the young Somalis. And when I ran into the story like by accident. And my third year was about to come, and I didn't know what my last project would be as a third year student. So I was one day I was watching the Mo Farah winning I think the fifth 500 no 5,000 meters or 10,000 meters during the during the London Olympics back in 2012, and so I started doing research about his background. And when I did the research, I found out that he himself was born in Somalia, but his father was born in Hounslow in London. And I was quite surprised, like, were the Somalis already back then in London? So I started doing a bit of research, asking questions on Twitter. Someone on Twitter said, yeah, my sister did a documentary about Somali sailors in Cardiff. They've been there over 150 years. So that's how I came into the story, through internet. And once I found the person that made the documentary, I spoke to her. She gave me a few background information, and that's how I got the ball rolling. By 2012, I already knew I have to do something within Somali sailors, and that I have to do a documentary, my own version of it. So I took the plunge during my third year and did some more research, and I found the right crew because it is a university project, so you have to work with your fellow students, and I was lucky to have an amazing crew. Safe Harbour came into light thanks to a local poet in Cardiff, in Bhutan. That's where Bhutan is the heart of the sailor community, not only the Somali community, the heart of Cardiff Bay community, and used to be called Tiger Bay. Now it's changed into Cardiff Bay. Tiger Bay at that time, from the 20s till the 80s, it was known as a no-go zone for people that weren't part of that community. It was known for its criminality. It was known for its brothels, fights. So it had a really bad reputation amongst the people within Cardiff, but not within the community. For the community, it was their home. It was where they go to the mosque, where they go to school, where they work. It was a very close-knit community, and people that lived in the community itself didn't go outside of the city. Most of them, because of their background, if you were not white, you were not allowed to go in Cardiff Bay, in Cardiff city center. So even the Somali sailors, especially the Somali sailors, what they did was they could go anywhere within Wales, apart from their own city center. The sailors that I interviewed, the retired sailors that I interviewed, they consider themselves Somali first. I think especially the ones that left Somalia, in the early 50s, 40s, or even further, they're more rooted within Somaliness. They have like certain cultural traditions that no longer apply in Somalia itself or Somaliland. They have the old traditions that we no longer are aware of, and they were quite very, also within the religion, they were really deep rooted with it. To them a few times. I went to them as well, and the sailors that I interviewed were actually there's this place called there's this retirement home where all the retired sailors come together every day. Some of them live there, some of them come together to play games, they play cards, they watch the Somali news, They joke around, and anybody's welcome there. You can talk to them. They will help talk to you. But as soon as the camera, they will scatter around. So it took before we start filming. I've been there 1 or 2 times before, just to get to know them, build some kind of relationship. Even though it was difficult because I live in London, and I had to go all the way to Cardiff in Wales. But I think I managed to get 3 of them, to convince them to get their trust. And I think maybe because I think the reason why they said yes is because one of them said, we are dying. If we don't tell our stories, our stories, our life will die out, and it needs to be shown. And I think he's the one that convinced some of his friends to participate. The biggest impact of the people that I interviewed, I think, was the stories that I discovered while I was still doing my research. There was this story that I read by there's this Afro-American anthropologist called Glenn Morgan. He's still based in Cardiff. He wrote a few books about the black communities in Cardiff. And one of them that he wrote about was Mahmoud Hussein Matan. He was a young sailor who came around the 40s, 50s. He came in Cardiff, and he gave them but he was but by the time he came to Cardiff, he was still too young to work. But he gave them false age so he could work, and he worked there a few years. He fell in love with a Welsh local girl, and they got married without the consent of their family because of the racial issues at that time. And they had 2 kids, and they weren't allowed to live together. They had to live separately, and she still lived with her family, and he lived with the sailors in one of their boarding houses. Back then, there were a lot of boarding houses run by Somali men, and but unfortunately, what happened to him was one day he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Someone saw him at a shop run by a Jewish lady in Tiger Bay. She was killed, and he got the blame. And eventually, he was also and unfortunately, he became known for being the last person to be hanged in Cardiff. And they hanged him around 1953, I think. And one of the saddest part was that he was hanged. The prison that he was being kept was near the house of his wife. So every day she could see him during the trial, and then suddenly she didn't see him, so she knew he was hanged. He was killed, and she and her family and the sailors fought for 50 years to get the name of his name cleared. And I think around early 2000 they finally managed to clear his name. She did get a little bit of money as reparation for killing her husband. But by then it was okay. I hope one day to go back, maybe find his family in Cardiff and interview them. Tell the story, their side of the story. And one of the other weirdest part of the story was like the person that actually killed the lady was one of the witnesses, and only 50 years later, and they find who it was. But by then he was already dead. How important it is for us as Somalis to tell our stories. First, it is important because if we have to tell our own stories, we are so used to other people telling our stories, especially in a really negative way about, we are portrayed as, Somalia, Mogadishu, the most dangerous place in the world, or Somalia is known for its piracy, Somalia is known for its terrorism, Somalia is known for its poverty. And I think by telling our own stories, we can show a nuanced, a more honest story about ourselves. And back before the war, Somalia was known as, as a nation of poets, as a nation of storytellers. We are by nature, we are storytellers, and I think the only way to do it is to counteract all that negativity through by taking charge of our own story. And it is difficult because we don't have as many access as other communities. We're still within the Western diaspora. We're still quite invisible. It will take a while, but I think the only way is we have to, start our own. We already have it, but we have a long way to go. How did the Somali Sailors end up in Cardiff? Cardiff was, for a long time, was one of the biggest port cities in the UK, including, besides Cardiff, that you had the dock city in Liverpool, London, Bristol, and Newcastle. I think there probably were more, but they were the main porters where different sailors, different trades routes were being used. And so, since you probably know, the British Empire was everywhere. It had practically anywhere in the world they had their hands on it, and Somalia wasn't any different. I think Somaliland became part of the British protectorate around the 1850s, I think, roughly, and it became Hargeisa became one of their strongholds where the British Army fueled up with livestock and other resources that they needed to protect their Indian route and protect their Yemeni route, and that's how the Somalis became that's how the Somalis became one of their sailors across the world. The Somali, and they were offered, most of them were offered citizenship, and they fought for the British Army in World War One, World War Two, and also in the Falklands. There are a few Somali families that have been, with generation upon generation, they were either Navy sailors and that fought in those wars, or they were from the World War One up to. There are even some families that actually that are stationed in Iraq. That their grandfather fought for the British. So the Somalilanders have always had a role in that. That's the linkage. And during the colonial time, we were split between the different European and colonizers. South Somalia was under Italian rule. It was called Italian Somaliland. Then you had the north, British Somaliland, and Djibouti was French Somaliland, and it probably had another name, but I cannot recall that. That's the linkage. Why there are so many Somalis, in Cardiff. Why there still are, actually. When Somalia got the independence in 1960, funny enough, a lot of Somali sailors ripped their British passport, and they never so they were stuck in limbo. They no longer had they ripped their British passport and actually got Somali passport for the first time. And but then the war broke down in the early 90s, so they were stuck. They no longer had a British citizenship. By ripping out their passport, they showed that how proud they were of their Somaliness first, and that they actually, that there was this conflict, that they were serving the British Empire, but at the same time they wanted to be independent. So really, weird juxtaposition, but anyway, I get it. It's a really Somali way. It's been that way for we've always, rejected colonialism. We've always done it, and we still do.